Court made that decision today after it says it found an agreement with the previous prosecutor, Bruce Castor, that prevented Cosby from being charged in the case. The 83-year-old has served more than 2 years at a state prison in Collegeville, and he's maintained that he's done no wrongdoing in this case. He was convicted in 2018 and sentenced to 3 to 10 years for drugging and molesting Andrea Constand. Now, prosecutors did not immediately say if they would appeal or try to try Cosby for a third time. But this news, of course, is just breaking. But once again, Bill Cosby's sexual assault conviction has been overturned by Pennsylvania's highest court. Get back to this breaking news. I'm Alex Hawley in the Fox 29 newsroom. Bill Cosby's sexual assault conviction has been overturned, and he is expected to be released. Pennsylvania's highest court made that decision today after it says it found an agreement with a previous prosecutor, Montgomery County DA Bruce Castor, that prevented Cosby from being charged in the case. The 83-year-old has served more than 2 years at a state prison in Montgomery County. He was convicted in 2018 and sentenced to 3 to 10 years for drugging and molesting Andrea Constand. And so now we have a live shot of Skyfox over the State Correctional Institution. This is SCI Phoenix in Montgomery County. Now we're looking at it. And once again, this has been Bill Cosby's home since his conviction in 2018. And this is in Montgomery County. You can see there's already some activity outside of the facility there. And he's been serving a sentence there. And remember, he was denied parole for refusing therapy programs for sex offenders. And he's maintained that he hasn't done any wrongdoing since his conviction. So as we continue to be on watch here at SCI Phoenix, we want to bring in legal analyst Bruce Cordon, you've covered this trial extensively for us. You were there for both trials. You were there when he was convicted. Walk us through today's decision. And are you surprised by this decision by Pennsylvania's highest court?
Well, Alex, it is stunning in one way, but not altogether surprising. And here's what I mean by that. This decision by Bruce Castor way back a good decade or so ago, to not criminally charge Bill Cosby, but in exchange say, look, Mr. Cosby, we will not criminally charge you, nor will any of my successors. This is a get out of free jail card forever. And in exchange, you will sit down for a deposition in a civil suit filed by Andrea Constand against you. Cosby took that deal, said, yes, I will sit for that deposition. The deposition sat there for quite a while. You'll recall that Kevin Steele ultimately replaced Bruce Castor as district attorney. In part, during that whole campaign, Steele made much of Castor's mishandling of the Cosby case, and at least in Steele's view. Then, of course, Kevin Steele prosecuted the case. Now, what the high court in Pennsylvania essentially said today was, when Bruce Castor made that agreement with Bill Cosby, it doesn't matter that he did or did not actually have the authority to say no prosecutor in the future can ever prosecute you. That didn't matter. What mattered was Bill Cosby took him at his word and relied upon that promise of non-prosecution, no criminal prosecution, in order to agree to the deposition. That deposition ultimately was used against him in the second trial, and that is what helped to convict him. Frankly, as I remember the trial, it was not necessarily a smoking gun per se, that deposition information, but it certainly did get across the idea that Cosby was no stranger to using medications, drugs of one kind or another to make women in his company more compliant to his will. And so there's no question that deposition helped in the prosecution's case in Cosby number 2, if you will. And the high court basically said today that this was unfair, a violation of Bill Cosby's due process rights to have given that deposition thinking he would never be criminally charged. And then all of a sudden the successor to Bruce Castor comes out and says, nope, we're criminally charging you and we're using that deposition against you.
And that's the interesting part. They were saying that he relied on the fact that he would not be prosecuted, and thus that's why he spoke so freely. And when you think about it, it's his rights against self-incrimination, that those were violated. That's what they're saying here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, there are some folks who will say this is a technicality of sorts, but look, your due process rights are your rights. It's right there in the Constitution. And so technicality sounds a little flippant, a little bit of a minor issue. It's not. It's a significant issue. But having said that, let's be very clear. This is not a question of the judges saying you convicted an innocent man. What they're saying is you violated his rights and nothing else really matters. Now, of course, in shutting down this case and saying it's over, he's out of jail, the question then, if the judges hadn't said you cannot retry him, which of course they have said, this is over with, it's done. But even if they hadn't, you had to wonder whether the prosecutor, Kevin Steele, would have said, do we really want to try this guy a third time? Remember, he's 83 years old, has already served 2+ years of a 3 to 10 sentence. So the idea that you would charge him again, try him again, of course, without being able to use that deposition, even if you got a conviction, you might get a couple of more years. He's likely to be out in a couple of years anyway, so it wouldn't have made sense probably to try him again, even if they could have. And of course, they cannot, according to this ruling by the High Court today.
We appreciate that you're going through the details of why this came about, this decision, because a lot of people are weighing in, especially on social media, some using this to say, hey, he's now being freed. For example, Felicia Rashad, as you know, played his wife on screen for The Cosby Show for years. She tweeted out just a few moments ago, finally, a terrible wrong is being righted. A miscarriage of justice is corrected. So it's interesting how some people are taking this decision because it's not saying that, like you mentioned earlier, that he's innocent.
No, not at all. And in fact, if you remember, Bruce Castor took a fair amount of heat at the time. Matter of fact, was on the witness stand himself during Cosby 2. And in fact, in some quarters was essentially being laughed at. The folks saying, look, what makes you think that you as a prosecutor now can prohibit or preclude your successors 5, 10, 15 years from now from prosecuting someone just because of an agreement you've made and you've chosen to go public with this agreement? But in fact, again, it doesn't matter whether he really had the authority to do that or not. What's important is that Bill Cosby relied on that promise in terms of agreeing to the deposition that was then used against him in that second trial.